My werewolves have broken formation again, and every one of them is fawning over a girl who mucks out the hound pens. I stand at the top of the kennel stair in full council dress, watching 6 of the deadliest beasts in Stormhollow, beasts that have savaged siege lines and torn the throats out of pretenders, roll onto their backs in the muck like fat pups because a houndkeeper has walked into the yard with a bucket. I called them once. I called them twice. Greyholt, my oldest, my grimmest, the wolf who has never once in 9 winters disobeyed me, flattened his ears and pretended he could not hear his king. I am not a patient man. I am the Alpha King. When I speak, mountains have been known to reconsider. And here I stood, ignored, while the girl laughed low in her throat and scratched Greyholt behind one scarred ear as if he were a lapdog and not the terror of 3 border wars. "Cold Iron," I said to my master of kennels, who had gone the color of old cheese, "explain this." "I cannot, Majesty," he wrung his cap. "They will not leave her 3 mornings now. She comes to feed the sick hounds and the war pack simply comes. We tried barring the gate. Greyholt broke the bar. I came down the stair slowly, and the great wolves felt me come, and every ear turned. That is what they are supposed to do. They rose from the girl at last, ringing her, and I saw the moment she understood who had entered the yard, because the color left her cheeks, and she dropped to one knee in the wet straw with her head bowed so low the loose dark hair fell over her face. "Majesty," she said, just that. Her voice was steady, which few voices are when they are pointed at me. "Rise," I told her, "look at me." She rose, she looked, and I will tell you what I felt in that instant, because I am done pretending I felt nothing, though I would go on pretending it to myself for a great many weeks yet. I felt the floor of my own chest drop away, as if I had missed a step in the dark. Some old, buried instrument in me swung hard toward her like a needle toward the north. I did not have a name for it then. I had spent my whole life refusing to need anything, and I would not begin with a girl who smelled of tallow and dog. "What is your name?" I asked. "Wren, Majesty, Wren Ashmore. I keep the hounds, the lesser ones, the old and the whelping, and the ones too small for the war pack." She said it plainly, without the wheedling grovel of the court, without the calculation. She was telling me the truth of her small life because I had asked, and expected nothing to come of it. "My war wolves," I said, "obey no one living but me. They have opened the throats of men who so much as raised a voice to me. Do you understand what it means? That they lie in the filth at your feet." Her eyes went to Greyholt, and the great grey wolf leaned his enormous head against her hip, nearly toppling her, and she braced against him with an easy hand. "I think it means they are lonely, Majesty," she said. "The war pack. The hounds have each other and the whelps have their dams, but your wolves have only you, and you are the king, and a king has 10,000 things. I only fed one of them once, the old grey. He had a thorn deep in the pad and no one dared touch him, so I did." "You dared touch Greyholt's paw? It was not possible. Men have lost hands." "I asked him first," she said, as if that were an answer, and the maddening thing is that it was. I looked at my wolves, I looked at the girl. Somewhere behind me, the whole apparatus of my mourning waited. The council, the border dispatches, the endless question of whom I would marry, and when, the treasury, the 3 lords who wanted my throne, and the one captain I suspected wanted it most. And here in this reeking yard, my deadliest weapons had laid down their weapons for a houndkeeper who asked a wolf's permission before she pulled a thorn. "They will return to their posts," I said, "when I command it." I commanded it. Greyholt looked at me with those pale wolf eyes that have read the intentions of 1,000 enemies, and then he looked at her, and he did not move until she stepped back and murmured, "Go on, then." "Go to him?" Only then did the pack rise and file past me up the stair, and every last one of them brushed her hand with a lowered head on the way, like knights taking leave of a queen. I should have left it there, a curiosity, a thing to be corrected. I told myself I would have cold iron bar her from the war yard and the matter would be closed, and I turned to go, and I found, to my private fury, that I had turned back to look at her again. She had knelt to the smallest, sickest hound, the runt she had come for in the first place, and she was coaxing broth into it drop by drop with a rag, murmuring to it the way she had murmured to my monsters, and she had already forgotten I was there. No one forgets I am there. It is the first thing I learned about being king, that a room reorganizes itself around you like iron filings around a lodestone, that men measure their breathing by yours. This girl, alone in my whole kingdom, had turned her back on the Alpha King to save the life of a dog no one would miss. "Cold Iron," I said quietly. "She stays. She keeps the war yard as well as the hounds. See, she is fed properly and given a warmer cell than that drafty loft you keep the girls in." "Majesty," he was astonished. "So was I, the court will talk." "The court always talks. It is the only work it does." I went up the stair. At the top, I permitted myself one more glance and hated myself for it. That was the beginning, though I named it nothing. That night in the council chamber, with the fire low and the map of the northern marches spread under my hands, my captain of the guard leaned close and said in his smooth, obliging voice, "I hear the war pack has taken a fancy to a kennel drab, Majesty. Charming. Though a wise king watches what his wolves love, beasts sense things men miss." He smiled. Halbrand Sarn always smiled. It was the smile of a man laying planks over a pit and inviting you to walk. "Do they?" I said. "They do," he straightened. "I only mean a creature that can turn the warpack's head could turn other things, for good or ill. I would have her watched, for your safety, of course, always your safety." I looked at Sarn for a long moment. He had served me 11 years. He was clever, tireless, beloved by half the guard and feared by the rest, and lately I had begun to notice how many of the new officers were his men, how the rotations at the gates had quietly become his to assign, how often his council arrived dressed as concern for me and left having widened his own reach by a hand's breadth. I trusted him the way you trust a river in flood, usefully, and never with your back turned. "Watch her if it pleases you," I said, "but harm her and I will know." "Harm her," he spread his hands, all wounded innocence. "Majesty, what is a houndkeeper to me?" "Everything as it happened." But neither of us knew that yet, or perhaps he suspected it before I would let myself, because a schemer studies the king's weaknesses the way a physician studies a wound, and he had seen my face in the yard, and I had not seen it myself. That is the danger of a man who will not look in a glass. His enemies see him clearer than he sees himself. I dismissed the council. I did not sleep. I told myself it was the border, the treasury, the marriage the lords kept pressing on me, Lady Sable of Ravensmoor, cold and gold-haired and correct, whose father commanded 4,000 spears I could not afford to lose. A sensible match. A loveless, sensible, iron match, and every counselor I had wanted it done by winter. But when I finally closed my eyes, it was not Lady Sable I saw. It was a girl kneeling in wet straw with a dying runt in her lap, asking a werewolf's leave before she touched its wounded paw, and my whole deadly pack lying down around her like the world had finally shown them something worth being gentle for. I rose before dawn. I told myself I was going to inspect the northern watch. My feet took me to the kennels. I found her already at work in the gray before sunrise, and I found my wolves already with her, which meant they had slipped their kennel again, which meant Greyholt had learned to lift the latch. She did not hear me on the stones. She was walking the row of war pens with a lantern, and at each gate a great head rose to meet her, and she named them as she went, Morning, Bracken. Morning, Maida, greedy thing. Sorrow, don't sulk, I see you. She had names for all of them. I did not have names for all of them. I had numbers and a war master's ledger. She had names. I watched from the dark of the arch longer than a king should watch anything unobserved. There is a particular loneliness to being the Alpha King that I had never spoken aloud to a living soul, and it is this, that everything in my life comes to me arranged. The fruit is already cut. The horse is already saddled. The woman is already chosen for the size of her father's army. Nothing in my kingdom is ever simply itself in my presence because my presence bends it. And here was a girl who did not know I was watching, being entirely herself, tired, half-frozen, tender, unglamorous, real. And I found I could not look away from the plain, unbent truth of her the way a starving man cannot look away from bread. "You may as well come in from the cold, Majesty," she said without turning. "Greyholt's been telling me you were there since I lit the second lantern. He won't settle till you do." "I came out of the arch. How did he tell you?" "He leans," she set down the lantern. "When he wants a thing, he leans toward it. He's been leaning at that archway like a fool. I only followed the lean." Then she seemed to hear herself and dropped her eyes. "Forgive me. I forget my place with the wolves." "I don't forget it with you, Majesty. I swear it." "You forgot it very thoroughly just now," I said, and I heard something rusty and strange come into my own voice, and it took me a moment to recognize it as amusement. I had not been amused in a long while. Kings are flattered constantly and amused almost never. The two are opposite things. She risked a look up at me, uncertain whether she was to be punished. "The wolves make me brave," she admitted. "I'm not brave elsewhere. Ask anyone in the scullery. I flinch at the steward's shadow. But out here, She gestured at the pen, at Maida's massive scarred face pressed to the bars for her. Out here nothing can touch me that they'd allow. It's the only safe place I've ever stood. That struck me somewhere I did not expect to be struck. That my werewolves, the thing men feared most about me, the living emblem of Stormhollow's dread, were to this girl the one safe place she had ever known. That she had found sanctuary inside the very jaws the whole world fled. "Tell me how you came here," I said, and I sat down on the mounting block like a common man, and Greyholt came and laid his great head across my boot, and for once I let him. She told me. She told it plainly without pleading for pity, which is the only way I can bear to hear such things. Her mother had kept hounds for a lord in the wet western fens and died of the coughing sickness when Wren was small. Her father she never named. I gathered there was nothing good to name. She had been passed from kennel to kennel like a spare lead, useful because she was good with frightened animals, and cheap because she was a girl with no name behind her. She had come to Stormhollow 3 years past in a cart of purchased whelps, and simply never left, sleeping in the loft, feeding the runts no one else would waste broth on, because a thing too small to matter to anyone else had always seemed to her the exact size of a thing worth saving. "Why the runts?" I asked. "They mostly die." "Mostly," she agreed, "but not always, and the ones that live remember." She smiled down at the sick little hound from yesterday, which had lived after all, and was now butting weakly at her ankle. "Everything remembers who was kind to it when it was small and no one else would bother. Wolves. Hounds, people too, I'd think, though I've less experience of people being kind." I did not answer that because I did not trust my voice. I, who had 10,000 things, sat on a mounting block in the cold and could not think of a single one of them. It was Cold Iron who broke it, hurrying across the yard with the day's alarms. A border reeve had come in the night. Raiders in the northern passes, 3 steadings burned, and worse, folded into the same dispatch as if it were a lesser matter. A rumor from the reeve's own lips that the raiders had been armed with Stormhollow steel. Our steel, sold or given over the mountain by someone within these walls. "Someone is arming my enemies," I said and rose, and the king came back down over me like a portcullis. "Find me Sarn. And the quartermaster's ledgers, all of them." But Sarn, when he came, was ready before I asked. Too ready, I thought later, though at the time his readiness looked like competence. He had already, he said, uncovered the leak. A junior armorer, a nobody, caught with a purse of foreign coin. The man had been questioned and had confessed and had, most conveniently, hanged himself in his cell before he could name whether he had acted alone. Sarn brought me the purse and the confession and his own grave, loyal face, and the whole thing was tied up in a bow, and I looked at the bow and did not like it. "Neat," I said. "I serve a neat king," said Sarn and bowed. That night I could not settle. I walked my own halls like a stranger, and my feet, I no longer troubled to lie to myself about my feet, carried me toward the kennels. And I heard them before I saw them, the war pack awake in the dark and not resting, restless, pacing. Greyholt at the gate with his hackles up and his great head swinging toward the eastern wall, toward the guardroom that was Sarn's domain, growling low in his chest at something I could not see. Wren was there in her shift with a cloak thrown over it, one bare hand on Greyholt's ruff, trying to calm him. "He's been like this an hour," she whispered when she saw me. "Him and Bracken both, facing the east wall. There's nothing there, Majesty, I've looked, but they won't stop watching it. It's like they can hear something you and I can't." I stood in the cold and watched my werewolves stare at the wall behind which my captain of the guard slept, and I felt the first cold finger of a suspicion I was not yet ready to name, laid alongside the other thing I was not ready to name, until my whole chest was full of unnamed and dangerous truths. "They can," I said. "That is what they are for. My wolves have never once been wrong about a man's heart. Never. It is the one thing in this kingdom I trust without question." Wren looked at me, and then at the wall, and then very slowly back at me, and I watched her understand that if the wolves were never wrong, and the wolves were growling at the guardroom, then something behind that wall was rotten. She was clever. That was the other thing about her I had not accounted for. Tenderness people expect from a houndkeeper. Cleverness they do not, and so no one at court had ever bothered to look for it, and so she had watched them all for 3 years from beneath their notice, and understood a great deal more of Stormhollow than they would ever have believed a kennel girl could hold. "Then I never saw you here tonight," she said quietly. "And I never said which wall they watched. A girl who knows the king's secret enemy doesn't live long enough to keep the secret. I know that much of courts." You will live, I said, before I had decided to say it, with more force than the moment required. I will see to it. She went still, the wolves went still. And I heard my own words land in the cold air between us and understood, too late, that I had just made a girl a promise no king makes to a houndkeeper, a promise with the whole weight of my life behind it, and that she had heard it, and that Greyholt had turned from the wall to look at the two of us with those pale, ancient eyes as if to say, at last, you begin to see. I did not sleep that night either, but it was no longer the border that kept me from it. The lords wanted an answer about the marriage, and they wanted it in open council, where I could not put them off with a wave. They arranged themselves along the long table like crows on a fence, old Duke Harrow, fat Lord Vessel, and at the head of the petitioners Lord Aldous Crane, whose family had held the eastern marches for 200 years and had spent every one of those years believing the crown of Stormhollow sat on the wrong head. Crane was smooth as poured wax and about as warm. He rose and he spoke of stability, of succession, of the comfort a settled queen would bring to a realm troubled by raiders and rumor, and he named Lady Sable of Ravensmoor. And around the table the crows nodded their approval of a match that would tie up 4,000 spears, and not incidentally, tighten every noble hand a little more firmly around my throat. A king without an heir is a question the whole world is tempted to answer for him, Crane said, and smiled his waxen smile. We would not have your majesty be a question. I am aware of what I am, I said. Sit down, Crane. He sat, but the thing was in the room now and would not leave it. Lady Sable herself was presented to me that evening, and I will be fair to her. She was handsome and composed and no fool, and she wanted the marriage no more than I did. It was her father's ambition wearing her like a glove, and we both knew it, and there was a bleak honesty between us in that, two people being spent as coin by other people's greed. You needn't pretend to me, Majesty, she said low, when the counselors had drawn back to give us the appearance of privacy. I know I'm a treaty. I only ask you don't make me a humiliated one. Whatever your kennel girl is to you, and the whole court is already saying what she is to you, keep it far from me, and I'll be a serviceable queen and trouble you for nothing but courtesy. So even Sable had heard. Of course she had. The court ran on such talk the way a mill runs on water, and the maddening injustice of it was that there was nothing yet to hear. I had done nothing, promised nothing, save one reckless sentence in a cold yard at midnight. And already the machine had decided the shape of my heart before I would let myself decide it, and was busy sharpening the shape into a weapon. There is no kennel girl, I said to Lady Sable, and the lie tasted of ash. I went down to the yard to prove the lie, I think. To look at Wren and feel nothing and thereby settle the question. It did not go as I intended. She was in the war pen with a hurt young wolf, one of the 2-year-olds, Nettle, who had gashed a foreleg on the practice barrier and would let no man near it. My kennelmen had ropes and muzzles ready and stood well back, because a wounded werewolf is death in a hurry. And Wren simply walked in among them with nothing in her hands, and knelt in the reach of those jaws, and talked to the frightened animal in that low, steady voice until the great wounded head came down and laid itself in her lap and let her bind the leg. And I stood at the rail and I smiled. I did not decide to smile. That is the whole of it, the thing I keep returning to even now when I tell this story to myself in the dark. My whole life I have governed my own face like a border. Nothing crosses it that I have not passed. A king's face is a treaty with the world. Men read it for omens. I learned before I could shave to keep it shut. And this girl, kneeling in the straw with my wounded wolf's blood on her hands, undid 20 years of discipline in half a heartbeat. And I felt my own mouth curve upward like a boy's before I even knew the feeling had reached it, caught it, tried to haul it back, and could not because it was already there and Cold Iron had already seen it. And worst of all, she had glanced up at exactly that instant and seen it too. She did not smile back, she was too startled. She looked at the King of Stormhollow smiling down at her over a rail like sun coming through a shutter, and something moved across her face that was half wonder and half terror. Because a girl with no name behind her knows exactly how dangerous it is to be smiled at by a king. I turned and left before I could do more damage, but the thing was out of me now and would not go back in. I had smiled before I could stop it. There is no undoing a thing like that. It is the tell of a mate bond in the old lore. I knew the lore. Every alpha of my line is raised on it, the involuntary gentling, the body recognizing its other half before the proud mind will consent. I had read of it as a boy and thought it a fable for the credulous. Alphas of Stormhollow do not stumble into destiny. We choose coldly for the good of the pack and the realm. That is our discipline. That is our strength. And my werewolves lay in a ring around a houndkeeper every dawn, and would not hunt if she was not in the yard to see them off, and stared at my captain's wall in the dark, and I had smiled before I could stop it. I sent for the oldest book in my keeping, the one chained in the deep library, the blood rolls of the first Alpha Kings, and I read half the night by a single candle. And there it was, plainer than I wished. When the fated mate comes to an alpha of the true line, the beasts of his blood know her before he does, for the wolf in an alpha's blood is honest, and the man is proud, and the man will deny for the sake of his pride what the wolf has already lain down at her feet. Trust the pack over the crown. The pack cannot lie. The crown lies for a living. I closed the book. I sat a long time. Then, because I am a coward in exactly one direction and no other, I did the thing that would cost me most. I resolved to send her away. I told myself it was for her sake, and there was even truth in it, which is what makes a good lie so serviceable. If the court had already decided she was my weakness, then she was already a target for Crane, who would use anything to unseat me, for Sarn, whose wall my wolves would not stop watching, for anyone who understood that the fastest way to break an Alpha King is not through his throat, but through the one soft place he has been fool enough to grow. I could protect a kingdom. I was not certain I could protect one girl inside my own walls, surrounded by enemies I could not yet name. And so I would put her beyond their reach, in a quiet steading in the green south, with a purse and a good name and a life. And I would go back to being iron and marry the 4,000 spears and never smile again where anyone could see. I gave the order to Cold Iron before I could unmake it, at first light. A closed cart and escort of men I choose myself, not Sarn's mine, she's to want for nothing. But she goes and she goes far and she does not come back. Cold Iron looked at me the way old servants look at kings who are about to do something stupid and cannot be stopped. "And the war pack, Majesty?" he asked quietly. "What do I tell the war pack when they wake and she's gone?" I had not thought of the war pack. God help me, I had not thought of the war pack. The war pack did not take it well, and that is the smallest word I have for what followed. They knew before the cart was even loaded. That is the thing about my wolves that no man who has not lived among them will believe. They read intention the way you and I read weather. Greyholt was at the yard gate before dawn with every hair on his spine standing, and when they brought Wren out cloaked and pale to the closed cart, he put himself between her and it and would not move, and Maida and Bracken and Sorrow and Nettle and old blind Fenno ranged themselves behind him in a wall of teeth, and my chosen escort, hard men, veterans, went white and drew back, because there is no order a man can give that will make him walk into the war pack of Stormhollow with his throat bare. Move them, I said. I had come down to see it done. I should not have come. A king should give the order and let the order do the cutting. But I could not send her off without, I told myself, without ensuring it went smoothly. The truth was I could not send her off without seeing her one more time, which is precisely the disease I was pretending to cure. "They won't move, Majesty," Cold Iron said helplessly. "Not for me, not for the whips, only—" He stopped. "Only for me," I finished. "Only for the king. My wolves obey no one living but me." That was the whole legend of them, the terror they cast over every enemy Stormhollow had. I could command them off her with a word, and they would obey, because they always obeyed me, because I was their king, and the discipline of the pack was the discipline of the realm, and it all held together only so long as the word of the Alpha King was iron. I opened my mouth to give the word. Greyholt turned his head and looked at me. "I have faced armies. I have stood on the wall at Hyphen with the Pretender's host filling the plain to the mountains and not felt my heart move, and I could not give the word, because the great gray wolf was looking at me not with defiance. My wolves have never once defied me, but with something worse, something I had no armor against. He was looking at me the way a loyal old soldier looks at a king about to betray himself. He was asking me. He, who obeyed no one living but me, was asking his king not to make him choose between his king's word and his king's own heart. And I understood, standing in that cold yard, that if I gave the word, Greyholt would obey it, because he loved me, and that it would break something in him that would never mend, because to obey it he would have to carry her from the only safe place she had ever stood, and he knew, as I would not let myself know, that she was ours. I closed my mouth. "Unload the cart," I said. The relief that went through that yard was a physical thing. It went through the wolves, and it went through Coldairn, and it went, though she tried to hide it, through Wren, who had stood the whole time with her chin up and her eyes dry, ready to be sent away without complaint, because a girl with no name behind her expects to be sent away and has learned not to weep about it where anyone can profit from her weeping. She only closed her eyes for a moment. Then Greyholt turned and pushed his huge head into her middle hard enough to stagger her, and she bent over him and buried her face in his ruff. And for a moment I looked away to give her the one thing I could, the privacy to be glad. And when I looked back, her composure was mended, and mine, I fear, was not. "You meant to send me off," she said to me later when the yard had cleared. Not accusing, just naming the true thing, as she always did. "For my sake, I think, not to be rid of me. I've been got rid of before. I know the look of it, and that wasn't the look. You were frightened for me." She searched my face. "Why would the King of Stormhollow be frightened for a houndkeeper?" "Because the court has decided you are the thing I love," I said, and there was no calling it back. "And the court is very rarely wrong about such things, even when the man is, and every enemy I have, and I have counted lately, and they are many now, knows exactly where to cut me. I cannot protect you here, Wren. I command 10,000 spears, and I cannot protect one girl in her own kennel yard from men who smile at my table. Do you understand? That is why I meant to send you away. Not because you are nothing to me," I heard myself and could not stop, "because you have become, God help us both, a very great deal." She was quiet a long time. Nettle the young wolf came and leaned against her leg, and she rested her hand on his head without looking down, the way you touch something that is simply always there. "Then don't send me away," she said at last. "Guard me here where they can see you doing it, where the wolves can see me. I've been safe nowhere in my whole life, Majesty, nowhere but this yard with these beasts, and you would take the one safe place I've found to make me safer. I'd rather be in danger somewhere I'm not alone than be alone somewhere I'm safe. I've done alone. It very nearly finished me long before any assassin could." She lifted her eyes. "Let me choose it, whatever comes, let it be a thing I chose. Let me choose it. No one had ever asked me for the right to choose their own danger before. My whole court begged me constantly to choose for them, to lift the weight of choosing off their shoulders, that being the deepest comfort a king can give. She asked for the opposite. She asked to be treated as a soul with the standing to weigh her own life and spend it as she saw fit. And I, who had spent my reign deciding the fates of others because it was my burden and my right, found that I could not refuse her, that refusing her the choice would be its own kind of cruelty, the gilded cruelty of the powerful who love, who cage the beloved thing for its own good and call the cage devotion. "You may choose," I said. "You may always choose. I will never take that from you, not your danger, not your leaving, not your staying. Whatever I am to you and you to me, it will be a thing you chose with your eyes open, or it will be nothing at all. I swear it on the pack." And Greyholt, hearing the oath in the old tongue that runs under my common speech when I mean a thing to the root, lifted his head and gave one low note that was almost a howl, and the whole pack answered it soft from the pens, and it raised the hair on my arms because I knew what it was. It was a mating oath witnessed, the oldest witnesses in the world, and I had sworn it before I had let myself say the word. Across the yard, in the shadow of the guardroom arch, a figure stood watching us, had been watching, I realized, for some while. Halbrand Sarn. He did not smile this time. He simply looked at me and looked at her and turned and went in, and I understood that whatever he had come to me not to say, he now knew for certain and would use. Sarn struck through the law, which is how clever men strike. Because the law is the one weapon a king cannot simply forbid without becoming the tyrant his enemies call him. He did not accuse her himself. That was the artistry of it. He let it rise from below, from 3 or 4 of the newer guardsmen, his men, though nothing on paper said so, who came before the court's justiciar with grave faces and a grave complaint. The warpack of Stormhollow, they testified, the realm's dread and shield, had been turned. Bewitched. A kennel drab of no birth had bound the king's own war-wolves to her will by arts unknown, and beasts that had obeyed only the Alpha King for 9 winters now lay at a nameless girl's feet. And was that not against nature? And was a thing against nature not, by the old statutes of Stormhollow, witchcraft, and was witchcraft not a matter for ordeal? It was beautifully done. I saw the whole shape of it the moment the charge was read to me, and I saw that Sarn had built it so that every road out of it ran through him. If I refused the ordeal, I confirmed that the king was bewitched and would shield his witch, and half the realm, frightened of raiders and rumor, would believe it, and Crane's faction would have the very instability they hungered for, a king unmanned by sorcery, ripe to be replaced. If I allowed the ordeal, I handed Ren to a process Sarn's men would shape. And if it went against her, the law itself would take her from me, and no army I commanded could gainsay a lawful verdict without making me an oath-breaker before my own lords. He had boxed the Alpha King inside his own crown. I have rarely been so coldly furious. I have rarely been so afraid. There is no witchcraft, I told the assembled court, and my voice filled the hall to its stones. My wolves obey their own hearts, as they always have. That is what makes them true. Any man who tells you a wolf's love can be bought or bound has never known a wolf. Then your majesty will not object, said Lord Crane, silk over steel, to the ordeal proving it. If the girl is innocent, the ordeal will show it, and we may all be easy again. Surely a king with nothing to hide welcomes the light. And the trap closed its last inch, because there is no answer to that a proud king can give but yes. The ordeal of Stormhollow for such a charge is old and cruel in its cleverness. The accused is placed, unarmed and alone, in the open ring of the war yard, and the war pack is loosed upon her. If the beasts are truly hers by unnatural art, so the reasoning runs, they will guard her and her guilt is proven, and she is put to death for sorcery. If they are not hers, they will do to her what loosed war wolves do to a stranger in their ring, and she is dead either way, but her soul is clean. It is a trap with no floor. Guilt is death and innocence is death, and the only mercy in it is the speed. Sarn had chosen the one ordeal in all my statutes that could not acquit her, only kill her 2 different ways, and he had wrapped it in the flag of clearing the king's good name. I went to her that night. She already knew, the whole keep knew by dusk. She was sitting in the war pen with Greyholt's head in her lap in the lantern light, not weeping, only very still, the way she went still when the world confirmed its old opinion of what a girl with no name behind her was worth. I've thought it through, she said before I could speak. There's a way it can be an acquittal after all, if you'll allow it. She looked up, and her eyes were dry and clear and terrible in their calm. Loose the wolves on me as the ordeal demands, but instead of loosing them at me, send them a threat, a real one, any man in armor to rush the ring with a bared blade at the king, and let the court watch what the pack does. If they were only bewitched to fawn on me, they'll do nothing. A bound beast guards its mistress and no more. But if they're true, if they love me the way a wolf loves and not the way a spell compels, her hand tightened in Greyholt's ruff, they'll leave me the moment you're in danger and put themselves between the blade and their king. A bewitched wolf can't do that. It's the one thing sorcery could never counterfeit, a free heart choosing you over itself. Let the whole court see them choose. That's not a witch's proof. That's the opposite. That's the truest loyalty in Stormhollow, and it will damn the man who called it witchcraft. I stared at her. In one stroke she had found the floor in the floorless trap, had seen that Sarn, in building an ordeal to prove the wolves were falsely bound, had left open the one door he never imagined a kennel girl would think to walk through, that the wolves might prove themselves gloriously, undeniably free, in front of every witness in the realm. And I understood all at once and completely what her hidden worth was, the thing the court had overlooked for 3 years because it came dressed in tallow and dog, that she was worth 10 of my counselors, that she had read the whole board while the great lords played their pieces, that my werewolves had not been bewitched by her but had simply, being honest where men are not, recognized before I would what she was, and had been trying in the only way beasts can to tell their proud fool of a king. They chose you before I would admit it, I said, hoarse. That is what this is. That is what it has been from the first morning. My wolves knew you were mine before I let myself know it, and the whole court has been calling their honesty a curse. Then let's make the court call it what it is, she said. In the open, where they can't unsee it. She almost smiled. It's a mad plan, Majesty, but I've watched these beasts 3 years, and I'd stake my life on their hearts sooner than on any man's word in that hall. In fact, the small, dry humor again, the thing I was coming to need like water, it seems I already have. I could have refused. I could have torn the ordeal down by main force and become the tyrant Crane needed me to be. Instead, I did the harder, truer thing. I let her choose her own danger because I had sworn I would, and because she had chosen it clear-eyed, and because to deny her now would be to say I trusted my crown over the pack, and the blood rolls were plain on that point, and so was my own hammering heart. But I added one thing she had not asked for, and I did not ask her leave. The man in armor who rushes the ring with a bared blade, I said. It will be me, no hireling. If my wolves are to choose between guarding you and guarding their king, then let the king be truly at hazard, so there is no counterfeit in it, and no man alive can say the proof was staged. I will trust my life to their free hearts in front of the whole court. If they are what you say, they will save us both. If they are not, I let it stand. She went pale. That's not what I meant. I never meant you to. I know, I said, but you gave me a choice, and this is the one I choose. You are not the only soul in Stormhollow permitted to spend their own life as they judge best. And Greyholt lifted his head from her lap and looked between the two of us, from the girl to his king and back, and gave that low almost howl again, the oath note. And I knew he understood every word, and I knew what tomorrow would ask of him, and I knew, as surely as I have ever known anything, that he would not fail us. But I did not yet know how far Sarn's rot had spread. I did not know that even as we planned the ordeal that would clear her, he was moving the last pieces of a far larger game, that the ordeal was never meant to be his true blow, but only the distraction, the drawn eye, the noise under which a coup could ripen. I would learn it the following dawn in the open ring, with the whole court watching and a bared blade in my hand, and every wolf I owned about to make its choice. But that is the next thing, and I must tell it in its place, for it is the hinge on which my whole life turned. They filled the waryard at dawn the way crows fill a gallows field. The whole court ranged on the tiered stone above the ring. Crane's faction and the neutral lords and Lady Sable pale and correct in her father's colors, and the justiciar with his rod of office, and ringing the top of the wall the guard. Too many of the guard I noticed, and too many of them Sarns, though I filed the thought away for later and did not. God forgive me, let it alarm me as it should have. Wren stood alone in the center of the ring in a plain gray gown, unarmed, her chin up. Across from her the pens, and behind the barred gates my war pack, and they were not fawning now. They had felt the temper of the yard. They stood like the killers they were, silent, watching, Greyholt at the front with his pale eyes moving over the crowd, reading it, hating it. And I stood at the gate in a plain harness with a bared sword, hooded, one more armored man among many, so that no wolf could scent the trick in it. For the proof to hold, the pack had to believe the threat, and so I had to make it real, and I did not let myself think too hard on what real would mean if this went wrong. The justiciar read the charge, he read the ordeal, he raised his rod. "Loose the beasts," he said, "and let the truth of Stormhollow be shown." They loosed the gates. My war pack came out into the ring like gray water breaking a dam, and the court flinched back as one body, and Wren stood very still in the center and did not flinch at all. And the wolves went to her, of course they went to her. They ringed her the way they ringed her every dawn, and up in the tiers Sarn's men began the murmur they had been paid to begin. Sorcery, see how they guard her, sorcery. The justiciar's face tightened toward a verdict. Half a heartbeat more and the word which would have been law. I rushed the ring. I came at her from the gate at a dead run, hooded, sword bared and rising, every line of me screaming threat, a man in armor charging the girl in the center. And I felt the whole yard's breath stop, and I felt Wren's eyes find mine through the hood and hold, trusting, terrified, trusting. And I drove in with the blade lifted to strike, and I put the whole truth of my life on the free hearts of my wolves, and I prayed. Greyholt left her. He left her in a gray blur, and he did not go for me to guard her. He came past her, between her and nothing, between me, and I understood it a full second too late. Understood it as the great wolf hit me and bore me down and stood over me snarling not at me but past me, toward the tiers, toward the wall behind me. The whole pack broke the same instant, and not one of them touched Wren, and not one of them touched the hooded man who had charged her, because they had scented me under the hood after all, they always knew their king, and they had scented in the same breath the thing I had missed. The true threat, not the staged blade in my hand, the real blades above. Sarn had made his move under the noise of the ordeal. They came off the wall as Greyholt bore me down, a dozen men, more, Sarn's chosen, crossbows and long knives, and their bolts were already loosed at the place where the king had been standing in the ring at me, at the exposed and hooded and undefended Alpha King. And it should have been the cleanest regicide in the history of Stormhollow. A king killed by his own ordeal in front of a court too frightened of witchcraft to save him. It was a masterwork. He had used the trial to draw every eye and empty the ring of my true guard and put me, personally, unarmored in anything that mattered, alone in the open. And it failed for one reason and one reason only. My wolves loved her. They had not come to the yard that morning to be tested. They had come because she was in the ring and they would not leave her side, and so the entire war pack of Stormhollow, the realm's dread, the thing Sarn had spent months maneuvering out of position, was standing in the killing ground at the exact instant the bolts flew, when by every plan they should have been penned across the yard. Sarn had counted on the ordeal to draw them off. He had not counted on them refusing to be drawn off from her. And so when the first bolts came, my pack was already in the ring, already at the height of their war blood, already between the crossbows and the crown, and they turned as one and became a wall of gray death across me and across her both. I have seen my werewolves fight. I have never seen them fight like that. Bracken took a man off the wall before he could loose his second bolt. Maida and Sorrow drove into the descending assassins, and the yard turned to screaming. Greyholt stood astride me and over Wren, who had thrown herself flat beside me the moment the bolts flew, and he took a bolt meant for my throat in his own great shoulder and did not fall, did not even break his snarl, only widened his stance over the two of us and held the whole storm off with his body. And little Nettle, the 2-year-old she had bound the wounded leg of, the pup no one thought a real werewolf yet, Nettle put himself in front of Wren, and a man came at her with a long knife, and Nettle did not hesitate, did not think of his own small life at all, and that man never reached her. I got my feet under me. I threw off the hood, and the yard saw the Alpha King rise from beneath his own wolves with a bared blade and the war madness on him, and the court that had come to watch a witch burn saw instead the truth of Stormhollow laid bare in blood. That the beasts had not been bewitched, that they had chosen the girl, chosen the king, chosen freely, thrown their bodies between the crown and the assassins, because their free hearts had judged where loyalty lay, and would not be moved from it by any bolt or blade. No sorcery in the world makes a beast die for you. Only love does that. Only love freely given that a wolf cannot lie about the way a man can. To your king, I roared, and the true men in the yard, and there were true men. There are always more true men than a schemer believes, drew and turned on Sarn's assassins, and the tide, which had been all his, broke. But Sarn was not in the yard. That was the last of his cleverness. He had never meant to be where the blades fell. He was a man who spent others and kept himself. Even as his coup died in the ring under my wolves' teeth, he was already gone, and he had not gone empty-handed, and he had not gone toward the gate. He had gone toward the keep, toward the throne room, toward the great bell and the muster horn and the loyal corps of the guard who did not yet know their captain was a traitor, who would answer his horn believing it the king's. And I understood, standing bloody in the ring with my dying assassins around me and my wounded wolf swaying over me and the girl I loved gripping my arm, that killing the king in the yard had only ever been Sarn's first blade. If it missed, and it had missed, he had a second, and the second was the whole guard of Stormhollow raised on a lie, turned against me before they learned the truth, the keep itself made into his weapon. The coup was not over. It had only lost its quiet way and been forced into the open, and an open coup with the muster horn in a traitor's hands could still burn my kingdom to the roots. Greyholt's hurt, Wren said on her knees beside the great gray wolf, her hands red to the wrist trying to staunch him, and her voice cracked on it, the only time her voice cracked in the whole of that day. The bolt's deep, I can't. He'll live, I said, and I did not know if it was true, and I laid my hand on the huge, heaving flank beside hers and felt the heart still hammering under it, obstinate, unwilling to be finished. He is too stubborn to die in front of you. So am I pulled her up. There was no time, and I took it anyway, one instant, and I did the thing I had refused to do for weeks. I put my bloody hand against her face, and I let her see all of it, the whole undenied truth of what she was to me, and I did not smile before I could stop it. I smiled and did not want to stop it in the middle of the wreck of a coup because she was alive and mine and I was done pretending otherwise. You were right about their hearts, I said. You have been right about everything. Now stay with Greyholt and stay behind the wall. I have a traitor to catch before he burns us all. The muster horn of Stormhollow is a great black thing older than the keep, and when it sounds every sworn man in the walls drops what he holds and runs to it, because for 400 years it has meant one thing only. The king calls, and the king is in danger, and you go. Sarn knew that. Sarn had spent 11 years making himself the man who stood nearest the horn. And as I ran up through the keep with the loyal remnant of the yard at my back and blood not all my own drying on my harness, I heard it sound, 3 long notes rolling down the stone throats of the corridors. And I knew that every guardsman in Stormhollow who had not been in that yard to see the truth was now running toward the throne room to defend their king against enemies unknown, and that the man they would find there, standing beside the empty throne with a grave face and a bloodied sword, telling them the king was slain by his own bewitched beasts, and the realm must be secured, would be Halbrand Sarn. It was very nearly perfect. A lie travels faster than a king up a stair. I ran faster. I came into the throne room behind the first of the answering guard, and I saw it laid out exactly as I had feared. Sarn at the dais, and 40-50 men of the true guard filling the hall, confused, half-drawn, and Sarn's smooth voice filling the space above them. Cut down in the yard, the beasts turned on him. Sorcery as we warned, and now the witches' faction moves to seize the keep. Bar the doors. Take any who come bloodied from the yard. The king is dead, and Stormhollow must not fall too. The king, I said from the great doors, is extremely difficult to kill, as you are about to be reminded. The hall turned. 50 faces, and I watched the lie die on every one of them, because there is a thing no traitor can counterfeit, and that is a king in the flesh with the warlight still on him. And they knew me, they had bled for me, and I saw the relief and then the fury go through them in a wave as they understood who had lied to them and to what end. Sarn's face did not fall. I will give him that. He was made of colder stuff than most. He simply recalculated in the space of a breath and reached for his last blade. Take him, Sarn cried, pointing at me, quick as a snake. See how he comes bloodied and mad from the ring where he loosed his witches' beasts on his own court. The sorcery has him, that is not your king, that is the thing the witch has made of him. Will you let it near the throne? Cut it down and save Stormhollow. And he had men still. A dozen of his own salted through the loyal guard, and they moved on his word, and for one terrible moment the hall hung on the knife's edge of believing him. Because a frightened man in armor will believe almost anything that lets him keep his sword up and his conscience clean. Crane rose then from the side of the hall where he had come. Of course he had come. He had smelled the throne within reach, and I saw the whole conspiracy stand up in that one motion. Sarn the sword and Crane the hand, the captain to do the killing and the lord to wear the crown after. The coup I had half suspected for months laid bare at last with both its faces showing. The captain speaks sense, Crane said, silk unraveling to show the wire beneath. A bewitched king is no king. For the good of the realm, my lords, the throne must pass to a clean line. To his own, he did not need to say, and the beasts and the witch both must burn. Who will restore order, who will? The doors behind me shuddered. Not the great doors I had come through. The lower doors, the servants' way, the passage that runs up from the yards and the kennels and the pens, and they burst inward, and my war pack came through them into the throne room of Stormhollow. They should not have been able to. They were wounded, half of them, and the yard was a shambles, and Greyholt should have been down in the straw with a bolt in his shoulder and Wren's hands on his wound. But he came through those doors at the head of his pack with the bolt still in him, dragging his own ruin up 3 flights of stone because his king had gone into danger, and his king's mate had told him where. And behind the pack, breathless, bloodied, gripping the horn cord she had cut to silence the false muster, came Wren. She had not stayed behind the wall. Of course she had not. She had done the thing that mattered instead, the clever, brave thing no one thought a kennel girl could do. She had gone to the muster-horn's own housing and cut its cord so no second false note could sound. And she had loosed the pack and led them up the servants' stair by the one road the wolves would follow without their king, her road, because they would go anywhere she went. And she had brought the truth of Stormhollow up into the throne room in the shape of 6 wounded wolves who took one look at the man pointing a sword at their king, and did not need to be told which man had loosed the bolts in the yard. There is your sorcery, I said into the ringing hall as my war pack ranged themselves not around Wren now but around me, around the throne, facing outward at Sarn and Crane and their salted men, snarling, bleeding, unbowed. Look at it, look well. My wolves came up 3 flights on their own wounds to stand between their king and a traitor. Is that a spell? Is that a thing bought and bound? There is no witch in Stormhollow. There is only a captain who sold my steel to raiders and my guard to a false horn, and a lord who has wanted my throne since his father wanted my father's, and a pack of honest beasts who love better than either of them will ever be loved. Now, I lifted my sword, every man in this hall who is truly the king's to me. And every man who is Sarn's, look at what stands beside me and decide very quickly how you would like to die. The salted men decided. Most of them threw down their swords. A man will die for a winning lie and not for a losing one. 2 did not and came at me and did not reach me because Maida and Sorrow were faster than their courage. And the true guard of Stormhollow, 50 strong and no longer confused, turned as one body on Halbrand Sarn. But Sarn was already moving because Sarn always moved before the reckoning reached him, and he did the last cold, clever thing, the thing I should have foreseen and did not because I had let my eyes go to my wolves. He did not run for the door. He ran for her. Crossed the dais in 3 strides and got behind Wren before Greyholt, wounded and slowed, could turn, and he had a knife to her throat and his back to the throne and the whole hall frozen, and he was smiling again, that plank-over-a-pit smile, breathing hard, ruined, but holding the one card that could still buy his life and perhaps his war. Ah, he said softly over her shoulder, the blade bright against her skin. There it is. There's the king's face at last. I wondered what it would take to make you show it. A whole coup, as it turns out, in a kennel girl's throat. He pressed the knife closer, and I saw a bead of red stand out along the edge, and everything in me went to ice. Call off your beasts, Majesty. Call them off and clear the door and let me walk out of Stormhollow with the girl, and perhaps I'll be generous and leave her breathing at the border. Or refuse me and lose the one thing your whole reign just proved you can't do without. Your choice, Alpha King. His smile widened. You're so very fond of giving people their choice. This is the part I have never been able to tell without stopping. I will tell it now because she says I should, that a thing survived is not weakened by the telling, and she is right, as she is right about most things. But know that when I set it down I am back in that hall, and the knife is at her throat, and I am the Alpha King of Stormhollow, and for the length of that standoff I was the most helpless man alive. I have power. That is the cruel joke Sarn had built for me. I had 10,000 spears and 6 werewolves and a throne, and all of it was worthless, because power is the ability to make the world move, and there is no move on the board that does not go through the half-inch between a blade and her throat. If I loosed the pack, he would open her before their teeth reached him. If I rushed him, the same. If I let him walk, he would take her out of my walls with a knife on her the whole way, and a man like Sarn does not leave witnesses breathing at borders, and I would have traded her life for a few more minutes of it. Every road ran through her throat. He had found, at the very last, the one place where being king could not help me at all. Call them off, Sarn said again. He was bleeding somewhere. I could hear it in his breath. He was a dead man who had not yet been told, and dead men holding knives are the most dangerous kind, because they have nothing left to lose and know it. I won't ask a third time, Majesty. My hand is tired, and it's very close to her neck. And Ren, I will love her past the end of the world for what she did in that moment, and it was not to weep, and it was not to plead. She looked at me across the length of that hall over the traitor's arm with the blade at her throat, and she was calm, not the frozen calm of terror, the other kind. The kind she had worn kneeling in the ring, the clear calm of a soul that has decided, and her eyes said to me as plainly as if she had spoken it, Don't call them off. Don't clear the door. Don't trade the kingdom for me. I chose this. Let it be a thing I chose. No, she said aloud to me, ignoring the knife entirely in that steady houndkeeper's voice. Whatever he tells you to do, don't do it. He can't win with me, only stall with me. The moment you clear that door, he's lost anyway. He only wants the door. Hold the door, Majesty. Her throat moved against the blade as she spoke, and I watched a second bead of red well up, and I thought I would go out of my mind. I've been nothing my whole life. Don't let me be the thing that costs you Stormhollow. That's not a good enough reason. I'm not a good enough reason. You are the only reason, I said, and my voice was not a king's voice. It was cracked to the root. The whole hall heard it break, and I did not care. You are every reason I have. Do not tell me what you are worth. My wolves knew your worth before I did, and my wolves have never once been wrong. Greyholt was on the floor. I saw it from the edge of my eye and could not turn to it. The great grey wolf, who had dragged 3 flights of stone on a bolt wound to stand between me and the traitor, had reached the end of what his obstinate heart could spend. He had gone down on the flagstones near the dais, slowly, his legs folding under him, the wound in his shoulder black and wide, and he lay heaving, his pale eyes still open and still fixed on Sarn, still trying, even fallen, even finished, to keep his king's mate in his sight and hold. And I thought, with a grief that surprised me by its size, he came all this way, and now he dies on the floor of a throne room and cannot even reach her. And it seemed to me in that black moment the shape of the whole thing, that everything true and free and loving in my kingdom lay bleeding on the stones, while the schemers held the knife. Your beast is dying, Sarn observed, following my glance, pleasant, poisonous. How fitting, the great loyal Greyholt, expiring at his master's feet, having accomplished exactly nothing. Sentiment, Majesty, that's what your reign has come to. You should have married Ravensmore and got an heir and kept your wolves in their pens and your heart in its box, and none of this would be happening. You made yourself soft, and soft kings make hard endings. He began to edge toward the door, taking her with him, the knife riding her throat, his men's fallen swords littering the floor between us. Now clear the way, or watch me prove how soft you've become. And here is the low place, the very floor of it, the thing I have to make myself set down. For one breath, one single breath in that hall, I believed him. I believed I had ruined us. That in letting myself love her, in smiling before I could stop it, in swearing an oath on the pact to a houndkeeper, I had grown the one soft place that a hard world always finds, and that Sarn was right, and that a king who loves has simply handed his enemies the map to his own throat. I believed for that one breath that I should have stayed iron. That love was the wound and not the strength. It is the oldest lie told to powerful men, and I had spent my whole reign half believing it, and in the worst instant of my life I believed it whole. Then Greyholt, dying on the stones, lifted his head. He could not stand. He had nothing left to stand on. But he lifted his ruined head off the flagstones, and he looked not at Sarn, not at me, he looked at Nettle. At the 2-year-old. At the pup Ren had healed, the small one nobody counted, a real werewolf, who stood trembling and unhurt among his elders because he was young, and they had shielded him through the whole day's blood. And the old wolf held the young wolf's eyes, and something passed between them in the wordless, deep tongue of the pack that I have no letters for, but that I understood as clearly as if it had been shouted, because I have lived among these beasts my whole life, and their hearts are the one book I can always read. Greyholt was giving Nettle the wound he could no longer close himself. He was saying, I cannot reach her. You can. You are small and you are quick, and he has forgotten you are even here because he does not know that the smallest thing in the room is the one she saved, and the thing you save never forgets. Go, now, while he watches the king, go to her. And Nettle went. But I have run past myself, and I must hold here on the knife's edge where it truly hung, because you should feel it the way I felt it. Sarn at the door with her throat under his blade, Greyholt fallen, the whole kingdom balanced on nothing, and the Alpha King of Stormhollow standing helpless in his own throne room, having just, for one shameful breath, believed that his love was his ruin. That is the bottom of my story. Everything after is the climb. But I lived a whole age down there in that one breath, and I will not pretend to you that I did not, because the climbing only means anything if you know how far down I had fallen first. Nettle went low and fast along the base of the dais where the fallen swords lay, in the shadow of the throne, and Sarn never saw him, because Sarn, like every man who had ever overlooked her, overlooked the small thing at the edge of the room. His whole attention was a rope stretched between me and the door, the king, the pack, the exit. He had counted the great wolves. He had not counted the pup, because the pup did not look like a weapon, any more than the houndkeeper had looked like a queen. And Halbrand Sarn's entire ruin was that he could not see worth unless it was already wearing a crown. Nettle reached the door before he did. He did not go for Sarn's throat. He was too small and too low for that, and the boy wolf was clever than his years, clever than his elders in that one instant, because he had Ren's own gift of finding the exact place a thing was vulnerable. He went for the back of the knee. He came out of the shadow of the throne like a loosed bolt and closed his jaws on the tendon at the back of Sarn's leg, the one hinge that holds a standing man upright, and Sarn's leg buckled. It was only an inch, it was everything. His knife hand jerked up and away from her throat as he lost his footing, 1/2 second of the blade not touching her skin, and Ren, clear-eyed, chosen, ready, having watched for exactly this because she had watched Greyholt look at Nettle and understood the plan before any of us, Ren dropped. She did not struggle against his arm. She went down out of it, folding straight toward the floor the way you slip a collar, all her houndkeeper's knowledge of how a frightened creature escapes a grip. And she was out from under the blade and rolling clear across the flagstones before he could close his hand again. And with her throat no longer under his knife, the last thing staying my war pack was gone. I have said I have never seen my wolves fight as they fought that morning. I was wrong. I had not yet seen this. Maida and Sorrow and Bracken hit Halbrand Sarn together and blind old Fenna with them, 4 werewolves of Stormhollow with a day's grief and a day's wounds to spend, and there was nothing left of the coup after that but noise, and the noise did not last long. I did not strike the blow. My wolves did not need me to. They had chosen at the very first and at the very last, and their choosing was the whole truth of the thing, and I let them finish it because it was theirs to finish. He had called their love a witch's curse. He learned at the end exactly what free hearts are worth, and it was the last lesson he learned. Then the hall was silent but for the wolves' hard breathing, and Crane, Lord Aldous Crane, who had risen to claim a throne, stood alone and pale beside the dais with no captain and no coup and no lie left standing, and my true guard closed around him, and he did not fight, because his kind never fights when the fighting stops being safe. "I only counseled," he began. "I only spoke for the good of the—" "You will have a great deal of time to explain to whom you spoke and what you sent over the mountains," I said. "Take him, take his household, and send riders to Ravensmoor before he can, no." I stopped. I had been about to move the pieces to be the king to secure the board, and I found I did not want to move a single piece until I had crossed the hall. I crossed the hall. Wren was on her knees beside Greyholt. Of course she was. She had rolled clear of a traitor's knife, and her first act, her only act, was to go to the fallen wolf, and she had her hands pressed to the black wound in his shoulder and her face bent close to his, and she was talking to him, low and steady, the way she had talked to him the first morning over a thorn in his paw. "Stay," she was telling him. "Stay, you great stubborn thing, you didn't come all this way up those stairs to leave now. Stay for me. I asked you, didn't I? I always ask you first. Stay." And the great gray wolf, who obeyed no one living but his king, opened his pale eyes and looked at her and stayed. I knelt on the other side of him and put my hands over hers on the wound, and we held the old wolf's life in between our 4 hands, and cold iron was already running for the wound woman and the hot iron, and the things that might yet close a wolf that refused to die. And I looked across Greyholt's heaving flank at the girl the whole court had overlooked for 3 years, and I said the thing at last, plainly, out loud, in the hearing of every soul in the throne room of Stormhollow, so that there could never after be any unsaying of it. "You are my fated mate," I said. "My wolves knew it the first morning. They laid down in the muck for you because the honest thing in my blood recognized you when the proud thing in my crown would not. I sent you away, and they would not let me. I put myself under their teeth, and they chose us both. And when a traitor put a knife to your throat, I learned the truth they had been trying to tell me since the beginning, that you are not the soft place in my reign that my enemies can cut. You are the reason it did not fall. A king who loves is not a king with a weakness. He is a king with something worth the whole strength of him. I was a fool, and my wolves were wiser than their king, and I will spend the rest of my life being glad they were." I did not smile before I could stop it. I smiled and meant every part of it and stopped nothing. "I love you, Wren Ashmore, not the houndkeeper the court overlooked. You, the clever, brave, tender heart that my whole pack knew was theirs before I would admit it was mine. Marry me. Not for spears, not for treaties, not for an heir the lords can bargain over. For no reason at all but that I cannot do without you, and neither, it turns out, can a single wolf in Stormhollow." The hall was very quiet. Somewhere a lord drew breath to object cranes kind always do, and thought better of it, because the war-pack of Stormhollow was ranged bleeding around a kneeling king and a houndkeeper, and no man in his right mind speaks against the plain will of those beasts twice in one day. Wren looked at me over the wolf we were both holding to the world. There was blood on her, and tears at last, now that the danger was past and it was safe to let them come, and something in her face that I had put there and would guard for the rest of my days. "You told me I could always choose," she said, her voice not quite steady. "You swore it on the pack, that whatever I was to you, it would be a thing I chose with my eyes open." "I did, I meant it, I mean it now." My heart stood still. "So choose, Wren, with your eyes open, and whatever you say I will honor it, even if it unmakes me." Under our hands, Greyholt's stubborn heart went on beating, refusing the grave, waiting, the whole hall waiting, for the houndkeeper the court had overlooked to answer the Alpha King. "I choose you," she said, "with my eyes open. I've had them open the whole time, it was you who kept yours shut." And then, because she was who she was, she added through the tears the small dry thing that has kept me human for every year since. "But not while Greyholt's bleeding out on your good floor, Majesty. Marry me after we've saved your wolf, first things first, even for a king." So I laughed. In the wreck of a coup, kneeling in blood beside a dying wolf, having just been accepted by the only woman I will ever want, I laughed out loud in the throne room of Stormhollow, and the true guard nearest us, hard men, veterans, men who had never once heard their king laugh, stared as though the sky had done something novel. And then they laughed too, the ragged laughter of men who have lived through a morning they did not expect to survive. And the sound of it went up into the old stone rafters where 400 years of grim horns had sounded. And it was, I think, the first purely glad noise that room had held in my whole reign. We saved the wolf. It was a near thing and a long one. Cold Iron's woundwoman worked over Greyholt for the better part of that day with hot iron and gut thread and a foul green poultice that stank the throne room out. And through all of it Wren stayed at the great gray head with her hands on him and her voice low, because he would hold still for her when he would not hold still for the iron. And he held, and the bleeding stopped, and toward evening the pale eyes cleared, and the huge tongue came out and found her wrist. And I watched a houndkeeper weep with relief over a werewolf on the floor of a king's hall, and thought I had never in my life seen anything I wanted so much to protect. He would carry the scar of that shoulder to the end of his days, and a little stiffness in the cold, and he wore both like decorations, the old soldier, prouder of the wound he took over his king and his king's mate than of any hunt he ever led. The rest of that day was the grim arithmetic that follows any coup, and I will not dwell on it, save where it touches this story. Sarn's salted men who had thrown down their swords I spared to the law's judgment rather than the swords, because a king who kills in the heat of a rescued morning is only a schemer with a better excuse. And I had just been taught by a houndkeeper what the difference is between a free heart's justice and a cornered man's. Crane I did not kill either, though half my council wanted his head on the wall by nightfall. I had his lands, his levies, and his correspondence, and it was the correspondence that finished him, for in it we found the whole rotten map. The steel sold over the mountain to arm the raiders and keep the realm frightened, the letters to Sarn, the plan to kill me in the ordeal and crown Crane over the ashes, and in his own careful hand, the marriage he had meant to force on Lady Sable next, once I was dead, and her father's spears were the only thing that could steady the throne. He had used everyone. He had even used the raiders, buying their burnings to make a fear he could ride. The green passes had bled real blood so that a lord could look necessary. I sent riders north with the truth and with steel of our own, and the raiding, deprived of the coin and the coordination that Crane's treason had lent it, guttered out over the following season into the ordinary small trouble of any border, which honest garrisons can hold. The great engine of the plot, it turned out, had been the plot itself. Pull the schemers out of it, and the danger deflated like a bladder. So much of what men fear is manufactured by the men who profit from the fearing. Lady Sable of Ravensmoor I owed a reckoning, and I paid it face to face, because she had been a piece on Crane's board no less than the rest of us, and she had never wanted the game. I found her in the guest solar, composed as always, already packed to leave before I could send her away, sparing us both the scene. "You needn't say it, Majesty," she said. "I saw the hall. The whole keep saw the hall. A man's wolves throw their bodies over a kennel girl, and a king laughs out loud beside a bleeding beast. There's no treaty in the world you could sign that would look like anything but chains after that. I release you. Gladly if you want the truth, though say I did it graciously when the court asks for my father's sake." She almost smiled. "I confess I'm curious about her. Any woman who can make the warpack of Stormhollow lie down and make you laugh is a woman I'd rather have as a friend than a rival. Bring her to Ravensmoor someday. My father keeps hounds. She'll like the hounds better than she likes any of us, and she'll be right." I told her she was welcome at the wedding, and I meant it, and she came, and she did become Wren's friend, which surprised the whole court and neither of the women in the least. Sable's father offered honest alliance instead of a forced marriage, gave his 4,000 spears more freely than he ever would have given them for a treaty, because men will fight harder for a king they respect than for a king they have trapped, and I had spared his daughter a fate she loathed, and he did not forget it. So the spears I had been told I could only buy with my heart I got for nothing but decency. The counselors who had sworn I must marry Ravensmoor or lose the north were very quiet about it afterward. Counselors usually are, when the thing they swore was impossible turns out to have been merely inconvenient to their own designs. But the moment I remember from that long bloody day, the one I keep, came at dusk, when the hall was finally cleared and Greyholt was breathing easy and Wren sat exhausted against the base of the dais with the wounded pup Nettle asleep across her knees and the rest of the pack drowsing in a loose ring around her. And I sat down on the floor beside her like a common man. I who had not simply sat on a floor since I was a boy, and she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt the mate mark come. The blood rolls speak of it, and I had thought it another fable. It is not. When a true Alpha of Stormhollow and his fated mate at last both choose the bond with open eyes, the mark rises on them of its own accord. No rite performs it, no priest calls it. It simply comes as sap comes, as dawn comes. I felt it wake along my forearm like warmth spreading under the skin, and I looked, and there it was surfacing in lines finer than any tattooist could draw. The old spiral end guard sign of the pack, the mark my father had borne and his mother before him, that had lain dormant in my blood my whole life because I had never chosen truly, only calculated. And on Wren's arm, where it lay against mine, the same sign was rising to meet it, twin to it, so that when we set our forearms together the two halves closed into one whole design, the guard spiral completed, and a faint light moved along the lines like the ghost of a wolf running, there and gone. She stared at her own arm as though it belonged to someone else. "What is it?" she whispered. "It is the truth," I said, finally allowed to show itself. "You have been my mate since the first morning you asked Greyholt's leave to pull a thorn. This only makes it visible. The wolves saw it the whole time." Now the world can see it too. I closed my hand around her marked wrist gently, and the light ran up both our arms and met and steadied to a low warm glow that I have felt every day since, faint as a banked coal that flares when she is near and aches a little when she is far. I spent my whole reign afraid that to love was to hand my enemies a weapon, and here is the answer written into my own skin. Love did not make me weak, Ren. It made me legible. It showed the world exactly what my wolves already knew, where my true strength was, and that it could not be bought, bound, or frightened out of me. Sarn thought that was my weakness. It was the one thing in Stormhollow he could never touch. She fell asleep against my shoulder before I finished, the poor exhausted heart, with the mark still glowing faint on her wrist and the pup on her knees and my werewolves ringed around us both. And I sat on the floor of my throne room all night and did not wake her, and did not, for once in my life, want to be anywhere the king was supposed to be. The court did not surrender easily. A coup you can end in a morning with wolves and steel. A prejudice takes longer, and is in its way the harder war, because it wears the face of good sense and speaks in the reasonable voices of men who mean you no harm, and mean her every harm without ever raising their hands. They came to me in ones and twos over the following weeks, the great houses that had not thrown in with Crane, the loyal lords whose loyalty now presented me a bill. They did not oppose the marriage. No one who had stood in that hall opposed the marriage aloud. They merely worried. A houndkeeper, Majesty. No name behind her, no lands, no letters, no training in the thousand small cruelties a court calls statecraft. Love her, of course, keep her, of course, but crown her. Set her over the ladies whose blood runs back to the founding. Seat her at the high table to receive ambassadors and weigh petitions, and hold the realm's face before the world. Surely a mistress could be honored, and a queen chosen sensibly. Surely the bond did not require the crown. Surely there was a tidy arrangement in which the king had his heart and Stormhollow kept its dignity. They were so reasonable. They were so kind about it. And every word of it said the same thing the whole court had said for 3 years without troubling to say it. That a girl who smelled of tallow and dog could be many things but never the equal of the people who had overlooked her. I could have crushed it with a word. I was the Alpha King. I could have crowned a scullery made by decree and dared them to blink. But I had learned something in that throne room, kneeling in blood, and it was this, that a thing forced on the court would be a thing the court forever waited to take back, and I would not give Ren a crown she had to hold by my strength alone, a crown that would sit on her head like an accusation. I wanted them to want her. I wanted the houses that doubted her to come to me and say, we were wrong, seat her higher, because a queen the court chooses freely is a queen no schemer can unseat by whispering. And I had had enough for one lifetime of what schemers do with a court's private doubts. So I did the thing that most frightened my counselors and most delighted me. I let her be seen. Not paraded, Ren would sooner have faced the assassins again than be paraded. But given real work, real weight, the true business of the realm, and left to be exactly herself in front of the people who had decided what she was worth without ever once watching her. They watched her now. They watched her sit through the northern petitions, where the burned steadings of the rating came before the throne for relief, and where the counselors had prepared the usual tidy denials, because the treasury was thin after a coup and grief is cheaper to send than grain. And they watched the houndkeeper, who had been one of those small overlooked people her whole life, who knew to the bone what it is to be the thing too minor to bother saving, ask the questions no counselor thought to ask. Not how much will it cost, but which of these folk have seed to plant if we get them to spring, and which have lost the ones who knew how, and where is the grain nearest to the need so we do not spend half of it hauling the other half. She had kept the runts alive on almost nothing for 3 years by knowing precisely where the little that existed would do the most good. It is the same art, feeding a starving whelp and feeding a burned march. It is only the size that changes, and she was not fooled by the size. The relief she shaped from a thin treasury reached more steadings, and saved more of them than anything my counselors had drafted. And the Reeves of the North went home and told the story. And the North, which had been Crane's country, began to love the kennel queen before the capital had finished doubting her. They watched her with the wolves, which no one at court had ever truly watched, because they had been too busy being frightened of them. And they began to understand, slowly being courtiers, which is to say being slow about anything that requires admitting they were wrong, that the woman who could make the warpack of Stormhollow lie down was not a curiosity or a witch, but the holder of the single most valuable trust in the realm, that the beasts which were Stormhollow's dread and shield answered now to 2 hearts instead of 1, and that this made the crown not weaker but doubly guarded. and that any envoy who came to a court where the werewolves adored the queen went home to his master with a very particular respect. What Sarn had called witchcraft, the ambassadors called strength, and they were right, and the counselors, hearing it from foreign mouths they respected, at last allowed themselves to hear it. And they watched her be kind in the small ways that a court, for all its cruelty, is starved for and does not know it. She learned the names of the servants who brought the council its wine, which no lord at that table could have told you though they had drunk from those same hands for years. She learned them the way she had learned the wolves, because to rent a name was simply the least you owed a soul you shared a roof with. She got the drafty loft where the kennel girls slept mendied and warmed, the one she had shivered in for 3 years, and did it quietly without a proclamation, and the girls knew who had done it, and the girls talked, and a court runs on talk, and for once the talk ran the other way. She never once lorded her rise over the people she had risen from. That more than the petitions or the wolves or the mark on her arm is what turned the court in the end. They are cynical. My courtiers and cynics are hardest to move, but not impossible. What moves them is watching, day after day, a power that does not corrupt the one who holds it, because they have seen the other kind so often that the sight of the true kind takes them off guard like a memory of childhood. The old Duke Harrow came to me first. He was the eldest of the doubters, a hard, fair man who had served my father, and he had worried aloud in council more than any of them. He came to me in the gallery one gray afternoon and stood a while watching Wren down in the yard below where she was walking the war-pack out for their exercise with Greyholt limping proud at her side, and he said, gruff, not looking at me, "I owe the girl an apology, Majesty, and I'm too old to make it prettily, so I'll make it to you and let you carry it to her. I thought you'd lost your head. I thought the bond had you and the crown would pay for it. I was wrong. That's not a king losing his head down there. That's a king who found the one soul in his kingdom that his enemies can't get at and had the sense to keep her. Crown her high, sire, higher than you were going to. And if any house grumbles at the wedding, send them to me, and I'll tell them what an old fool learned late." He cleared his throat and stumped off before I could thank him, and within the fortnight the houses that had doubted her were competing, in the way of courts, to have been her champions all along. And I let them, because a crown the court fights to place is a crown that stays placed, and that was all I had ever wanted for her. So when at last I named the day, no voice in Stormhollow spoke against it, and it was not because they feared me. It was because a houndkeeper had done in a season what no decree could have done in a reign. She had made them see her. The worth my wolves had known the first morning, the worth I had been too proud to name until a knife was at her throat. The court came to at last on its own 2 feet, and I did not have to crush a single lord to seat her, and that, I think, looking back, is the victory I am proudest of in my whole reign, prouder than any battle. Anyone can win a hall with wolves. She won it with her nature and left the winning gentler than she found it. There was only one moment in all of it when I saw the old fear cross her face, the girl with no name behind her, sure even now that the world would remember what she had been, and hold it against the woman she was becoming. It came the night before the wedding, and I will tell it in its place, for it is the last shadow in this story, and the way it lifted is the sweetest thing I have to tell. I found her the night before the wedding in the one place I should have known to look. The kennel yard in the dark, in a plain shift with a cloak thrown over it, sitting on the old mounting block with the war-pack drowsing around her, and the sick hound Runt, grown now, fat and glossy and useless and beloved, snoring across her feet. She had slipped the whole apparatus of the wedding eve, the ladies and the fittings and the ceremony of it, and come down to the yard, and I understood why before she said a word, because I had learned to read her the way I read my wolves. "You are afraid," I said, and sat beside her on the block, and Greyholt lifted his gray head and set it in my lap with a grunt, and did not otherwise stir. "I keep waiting for it to be taken back," she said. She did not pretend not to understand me, she never pretended. "My whole life, Kaelin," she had only lately begun to use my name, and it still undid me every time. My whole life, whenever something good came near me, it was on its way to someone else, and I'd learned not to reach for it, because reaching is how you get your hands slapped. And now there's a crown, tomorrow, for me. And I lie there in that grand, cold room they've given me, and I can't sleep for the certainty that someone's going to come in and say there's been a mistake. The king meant a different girl, get back to the kennels. It's not that I doubt you. It's that I doubt the world's ever going to let a thing like me keep a thing like this. She looked down at the mark on her arm, faintly glowing in the dark. So I came where I've always been sure of my welcome. The yard doesn't take things back. The wolves don't change their minds about you overnight. I trust them. It's people I've never once been able to trust to let me stay. I sat with that a while because it deserved to be sat with and not swept away, and Greyholt was warm in my lap, and the yard smelled of straw and beasts and the whole homely truth of her. And I thought about how to give her the one thing she had never in her life been given, which was not a crown. She cared nothing for the crown, but the plain, unshakable certainty of being kept. "Look at them," I said at last, nodding at the drowsing pack. "You trust them because they don't change their minds. Do you know why they don't? It isn't that beasts are simple. It's that a wolf cannot lie, not even to itself. A man can talk himself into and out of anything. I talked myself out of you for weeks, you'll remember, and nearly got us both killed doing it. But the wolf in my blood never wavered for one instant. It knew you the first morning, and it has not unknown you for a single breath since. That is what you married, Wren. Not the crown, not the court, not the man who was fool enough to argue with his own heart. You married the thing in me that is exactly as unable to take you back as they are." I lifted Greyholt's great head and turned it gently so the pale eyes found her. "Ask him. You always ask them first. Ask the old Grey whether the king is going to change his mind about you tomorrow." She put her hand on Greyholt's scarred shoulder, over the wound he took for us both, and the wolf leaned into it and made the low sound deep in his chest that is the closest my kind comes to a purr, the sound he makes only for her, and she laughed, wet and quiet, and I felt the last of the fear go out of her against my side like a tide turning. "That's not an answer, that's just a wolf being smug," she said. "It is the only answer that has never once been wrong in the whole history of my line," I said. "The pack cannot lie. The crown lies for a living. Trust the pack over the crown, Wren, even when the crown is on your own head tomorrow. They chose you before I would admit it. They will still be choosing you when we are both old and gray as Greyholt. That is not a thing the world can take back, because the world did not give it. My wolves gave it freely, and there is no power on earth that can make a free heart unchoose." And I felt myself smile, there in the dark yard, before I could stop it. The old helpless gentling that had first betrayed me weeks ago over a rail. And this time I did not even try to catch it. And she saw it. And she smiled back, and that was the whole of my wedding vow really, said the night before in a kennel yard to an audience of sleeping wolves. And the grand words we spoke the next day were only the echo of it for the court's benefit. The wedding I will tell briefly, because the true wedding was that night in the yard and the rest was ceremony, and ceremony is for other people. We were married in the old way of Stormhollow, under the open sky in the great courtyard, before the whole court and the northern reeves who had ridden down for love of the kennel queen, and Lady Sable smiling in the front rank, and old Duke Harrow gruff and proud as a grandfather. Wren wore no jewels to speak of. She said they weighed like a lie, and she was right, and she came down the courtyard steps in a plain gown the color of dawn with her dark hair loose, and the mate mark bare on her forearm for all the world to see. And she was, without a single ornament, the most dignified soul in that whole gathered court, because dignity was never a thing you could buy in Ravensmoor or borrow from a bloodline. She had carried it up out of the kennels on her own, and everyone could see it now that they had finally learned to look. And the war pack stood with us. That was the part the court still speaks of. When the vows were said, and the mate marks on our joined arms flared bright, and the low ghost light of the bond ran up both our hands and met and held, my war-wolves, Greyholt limping at the head of them, Maida and Bracken in sorrow, and blind old Fenno and young Nettle who had saved us all, filed up the courtyard between the ranks of astonished lords and formed their ring around us, the way they had ringed her every dawn in the yard, the way they had ringed me in the throne room. And they lifted their heads together and gave voice, all 6 of them, the great war howl of Stormhollow that had frozen the blood of armies, and turned it that day into the only wedding song I will ever want to hear, a sound made all of loyalty and no threat at all. And the whole court felt the hair rise on their arms and understood at last, wholly and forever, that this was no bewitchment and never had been. It was the truest thing in the kingdom, out in the open, singing. The honest hearts of Stormhollow choosing her one more time before the world. What came after the court, and the courtyard and the feast I keep. It is ours, and it is not for the telling, and it was tender past what my rough words could carry without cheapening. And so I will only say that when at last the doors were shut and the noise was gone, and it was only the 2 of us and the low, warm glow of the bond between our marked arms in the dark, I held the woman my whole pack had known was mine before I would admit it, and she was not afraid, and neither was I, and the world did not come in to say there had been a mistake. It never did. It never has. That fear she carried up out of the kennels I have spent every year since laying quietly to rest, one ordinary morning at a time, and the resting of it has been the great slow work of my happiness. But that is the years, and I have not told you the years yet, and there is one last thing I promised at the beginning of all this to show you, and I mean to keep the promise, for it is the truest picture I have of what we became. The years were kind to Stormhollow, and I have come to believe it was no accident, that a realm takes its weather from the hearts at the top of it, and that a court which has watched power decline to corrupt the one who holds it learns, slowly, to be a little less corrupt itself. Wren became a queen the way she had become everything else, from the ground up, by knowing the small true things the great people never troubled to learn. She never did care for the crown as an ornament. She cared for it as a tool, the way she had cared for a broth rag and a lead, a thing that was only worth the good it did the smallest creature within its reach. Ambassadors who came expecting to condescend to a houndkeeper went home unsettled, having been outthought over the treaty table by a woman who read them the way she read a frightened animal, finding the exact place each man was vulnerable, and being Wren, using it not to wound but to reassure, so that hard bargainers found themselves agreeing to fair terms and unsure how she had done it. She had a gift for making the other side feel safe, and men who feel safe stop clawing, and a great deal of what my father had won with armies she kept with nothing but that. The treasury mended. The North, which had been Crane's discontented country, became the most loyal march in the realm, because the Kennel Queen had fed its burned steadings in its worst season, and it does not forget who was kind to it when it was small. There was one more shadow in the early years, and I will tell it because I promised you the truth, and because the way it ended is of a piece with everything else. Sarn had a cousin, a bitter minor lord named Vole, who had shared the edges of the coup without ever quite stepping into the light of it, and who nursed the treason on in the dark for a year after the rest was ash, gathering the last few disaffected men who still whispered the old lie about the witch queen and her bewitched beasts. He meant to finish what his cousin began. He meant it at a hunt in the deep autumn woods, where a king is far from his walls and an arrow can be blamed on a stray. And it very nearly served and would have, but for the thing that had foiled Sarn, and that Vole, being a small mind cut from the same cloth, had failed to reckon with in exactly the same way. He did not reckon with the wolves. We do not go to the hunt without them, Wren and I. We never have. The pack is our shadow and our joy. And in those deep woods, hours before Vole's men were in place, Greyholt went strange and stiff-legged and would not go forward, and turned his gray head toward a stand of pine and growled the low growl I had learned years before to trust over any man's word in any hall, the growl he had once aimed at a captain's wall in the dark. Wren saw it first. Wren always saw it first. "There," she said quietly, laying her hand on the old wolf's ruff. "He's leaning again. Follow the lean." And we followed the lean, and we found Vole's men in the pines, and it was Vole who was surprised in the woods that day and not the king, and the last thread of Sarn's coup was cut there among the trees, by an old scarred werewolf who could still smell a false heart across half a mile of autumn forest, and by a queen who had never once in all her rise forgotten to ask the wolves what they knew. We were more careful after that for a season, and then the danger was truly gone, the disaffected scattered or reconciled, and the peace that followed was the long, ordinary kind that makes no songs and is worth more than all of them. And in that peace I watched my wife stop flinching. It went slowly, the way the fear had gone out of her the night before the wedding, tide by tide. There came a morning, I remember it, an unremarkable morning, years in, when a servant dropped a tray behind her, and she did not flinch at all, did not brace for the blow that a girl with no name behind her has learned to expect from every loud sound, only turned and helped gather the pieces and asked the trembling boy if he'd cut his hand. And I saw that the old wound had finally closed, that Stormhollow had at last convinced her, one gentle year at a time, that she was kept, that the world was not coming in to say there had been a mistake. And I had to turn away and look out the window a while, because a king should not weep at the council table over a dropped tray, and I very nearly did. She asked me once late, in the quiet dark with the bond glow low between our arms, whether I ever regretted it, the sensible marriage I did not make, the 4,000 spears I might have married instead of befriended, the tidy iron reign I had planned before a houndkeeper turned my war-pack's head. Whether the wolves, in choosing her, had cost me the cold, clean thing I might have been. "You are asking whether I regret being legible," I said, and took her marked wrist in my hand, and the light ran up both our arms and met. "Whether I would rather be back inside the box I kept my heart in, hard and safe and alone, unable to be cut because there was nothing soft left to cut. Wren, I spent 30 years believing that was strength. And then 6 werewolves lay down in the muck for a girl who asked their leave to pull a thorn, and they were wiser than their king, and they dragged me out of that box by the collar whether I willed it or not, and the day they did it was the day my reign truly began. Everything before you was arithmetic. I was very good at the arithmetic. But you cannot build a realm anyone loves out of arithmetic. You can only hold one down. The wolves knew that. They knew that a king who cannot love cannot truly be followed, only obeyed, and that obedience dies with the man while love outlasts him. They chose you for me because they could not bear to see their king go to his grave never having been anything but obeyed. I felt the smile come, unstoppable, the old helpless gentling that had first betrayed me over a rail and had long since stopped being a thing I hid. No, I do not regret it. I regret only the weeks I wasted arguing with my own honest heart. Do not make me count them. It shames me still. She laughed at that and let it go, and we lay a while in the glow, and out in the yard below the window I could hear the war pack settling for the night. The old sounds, the shifting and the sighing and the low, contented notes of beasts at peace. And it came to me, the way large truths sometimes come at small hours, that I had one promise left to keep, made to you at the very beginning of all this telling, and that I could keep it now, for it was very near, and it is the last picture and the truest. And I have been saving it. Before I keep the promise, I must tell you of the children, for they are the middle of the picture, and it would be no true picture without them. They came in their own time, 3 of them over the good years, and I will say only this much of that, keeping the rest as I keep all the tender things, that they were wanted and welcomed, and never once in my hearing spoken of as heirs before they were spoken of as sons and a daughter, because their mother had been a thing valued only for its use for the whole of her early life, and swore on the day the first was laid in her arms that no child of hers would ever be loved for its use before it was loved for itself. And so the lords who came, as lords will, to speak of succession and settlements over the cradle, found the kennel queen looking at them with the clear, steady look she had once turned on frightened animals, and going very quiet, and they learned quickly not to reduce her children to their places in a line, the way she had once been reduced to hers. My heir would be raised knowing he was loved before he was needed. It is a small thing, and it changes everything. A boy who knows the difference grows into a man his people can trust, and a boy who does not grows into a crane. But the picture I mean to give you is not the cradle or the council. It is the yard. For the war pack raised my children as much as their nurses did, and this is the thing I could never have foreseen in the cold years when I thought my wolves were weapons and nothing more. Greyholt was old by the time my eldest could walk, gray to white now, stiff in the wounded shoulder, slow. But he appointed himself the boy's shadow the way he had once appointed himself his mother's, and he would let that stumbling child do things to him that no man in the kingdom would have dared, pull his ears, sleep against his flank, learn his first steps hauling himself upright on great patient fistfuls of wolf fur. And the old killer of 3 border wars bore it all with an expression of such put-upon dignity that Wren and I would have to leave the yard to laugh where he could not see us and be offended. When my daughter came, it was young Nettle, no pup himself any more but a great scarred veteran, the wolf who had saved us all at the back of the traitor's knee, who took her for his own, and the sight of that grim werewolf lying flat and still for hours so a sleeping infant could use his ribs for a pillow is a sight I would not trade for any triumph of my reign. And they taught my children the thing the wolves had taught me, the thing that is the whole moral of my life if it has one. Ask first. Wren taught it to them in words, and the pack taught it in every patient hour, that you do not simply take, not even from a creature you are stronger than, not even from a thing that cannot stop you. That strength is precisely the reason for gentleness, and never the excuse against it. That the measure of a soul is not what it can force, but what it chooses to ask leave for when it could have forced. My son, the future Alpha King, learned to ask a wolf's permission before he touched it, before he learned to read. He will be a better king than I was for it. He already asks leave of the small people, the servants and the stable boys and the kennel girls, the way his mother does, the way I had to be dragged into doing at 30 by 6 beasts who knew better than their king. He was born already knowing it, because he was raised in a yard where the most dangerous creatures in the realm asked leave of an infant and were asked leave of in return. And to him, that is simply how the world is, powerful things and small things bowing to each other, and God willing he will never learn otherwise. Wren aged as she did everything, without vanity and without fear, and grew, if anything, more beautiful to me, though I know the court poets would not have said so, being fools who mistook the ornament for the thing. The mate mark on her arm never faded. It deepened, the way ours do, the bond glow steadying over the years from a young flame to a banked and constant warmth that I have only to close my eyes to feel even now. That tells me where she is in the keep the way a compass tells north. We quarreled, of course. I will not paint us as figures in a tapestry. We were two strong wills and we struck sparks. But we quarreled the way people quarrel who have never once doubted they will still be side by side at the end of it, which is a kind of quarreling that is half its own reconciliation, and the wolves would lie in the doorway through all of it looking bored, having long since learned that their king and queen make a great deal of noise and mean nothing frightening by it. And afterward she would take my marked wrist, and the light would run up both our arms and meet, and whatever the quarrel had been would seem very small beside that steady glow, and it always was. She asked me once whether I thought the wolves understood what they had done, whether Greyholt, lying gray and content in the sun of the yard, with grandchildren of my line tumbling over him, knew that he had, one cold morning years before, quietly overruled his king and rearranged the whole history of Stormhollow by refusing to leave a houndkeeper's side. Whether a beast could know a thing like that. He knew exactly what he was doing, I said, and I believe it to the root of me. My wolves have never once been wrong about a heart, and they are not wrong about their own. He knew I was going to my grave hard and alone and obeyed and never loved, and he could not bear it, and he did the one thing a wolf can do to save a man from himself, which is to lie down at the feet of the thing the man is too proud to want, and refuse to get up until the fool sees. He saved my whole life, Wren. That old gray wolf saved my whole life, and yours, and our children's, and the peace of a kingdom by being honest one morning when his king was not. And he would tell you, if he could, that it was the easiest thing in the world, because the pack cannot lie, and you were ours from the first, and all he ever did was decline to pretend otherwise as long as I was pretending. She wept a little at that, and so, I confess, did I, and Greyholt lifted his old white head from the sun and looked at the two of us as if to say we were both being ridiculous, and went back to sleep, and was not wrong. He lived a long good while yet, the old gray, longer than any werewolf in the rolls, as though sheer stubbornness had bought him extra years the way it had once bought him 3 flights of stone on a bolt wound. And when at last he did go, he went in his sleep in the yard in the sun with his head in Wren's lap and his pack around him and his king's hand on his flank, having asked, in the wordless way, only that we be there which we were, which we would always be. We buried him beneath the courtyard where he had sung at our wedding, and the pack keened over the stone for 3 nights, and so, without shame, did the Alpha King. There has never been a truer soul in Stormhollow of the 2-legged kind or the 4. He is the reason for all of it. I have made sure my children know his name the way other kings' children know the names of conquerors, and I have made sure they know it was not conquering he is remembered for. It was choosing. And now I will keep my promise and give you the last picture, for we have come, at last, to the night I have been walking you toward from the very first word. It is late now, and the keep is quiet, and I am where I have ended nearly every day of my life since a houndkeeper turned my warpack's head. In the low, warm room off the old yard, with the fire banked to coals, and Wren asleep against my shoulder with the bond glow steady on her wrist against mine, and the wolves, the whole pack, the young ones now and the middle-aged, Greyholt's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the line that never fails because it is bred from the truest hearts in the realm, asleep in a ring around the two of us on the warm stones, exactly as they slept around her the first evening in the throne room. Exactly as they ringed us at the wedding, exactly as they have slept every night since the world came right. That is the picture I promised you at the beginning. That is what all of it was for. Not the crown, though I kept the crown. Not the coup foiled, or the traitor answered, or the border healed, though those things mattered, and I am glad of them. All of it, the whole long saga I have set down for you, comes to rest in this one plain image, which any shepherd in the realm could have had for the asking, and which the Alpha King of Stormhollow had to be dragged to by 6 beasts because he was too proud and too frightened to reach for it himself. A man and the woman his own honest heart chose, asleep and safe and old together, ringed by a circle of sleeping wolves who guard them not because they are commanded to, but because there is nowhere in the whole world those wolves would rather be. I look at them in the coal light, the great heads on the great paws, the slow breathing, the ears that twitch even in sleep toward the sounds of the keep, and I remember standing at the top of the kennel stair a lifetime ago in full council dress, furious, ignored, watching these same beasts' forebears roll in the muck for a girl with a bucket, thinking it an insolence, a curiosity, a thing to be corrected. I did not know I was looking at the whole of my happiness. I did not know that my wolves, in that maddening, insolent moment, were showing me the only true thing in my kingdom and begging their king to open his eyes. It took me weeks to see it and a knife at her throat to admit it and a whole reign to be worthy of it. They saw it in a single morning. The pack cannot lie. I have carved those words over the yard gate now, where every child of my line will read them going in and out for as long as Stormhollow stands. The pack cannot lie. It is the wisest counsel I ever received, and it came from beasts, and it saved a man who had 10,000 spears and could not save himself. She stirs against my shoulder, half-waking, and murmurs my name, and I feel the old helpless smile come before I can stop it. I stopped trying to stop it long ago. It is hers, it has always been hers. It was the first true thing about me she ever surprised out of me, and it is the last thing I will surrender at the end. Go back to sleep, I tell her softly. I'm here, they're here. Nothing is coming in to say there's been a mistake. There never was a mistake. You were ours from the first morning, and you are ours still, and you will be ours when we are dust, and the yard has forgotten our names, but not this, never this. That once the fiercest hearts in the realm lay down in the muck for a gentle houndkeeper, and outed a king to himself, and were right. She settles, the glow steadies. In the ring around us a young wolf sighs and lays his head across my ankle the way his great-grandfather used to, and I do not move it, and I would not move it for a kingdom, having learned at last what a kingdom is worth against the weight of a sleeping wolf's trust, which is less, far less. I had it backward my whole young life. The crown is the small thing. This is the great one. I will sleep soon, here on the warm stones with my wife and my wolves, an old king who was very nearly a hard and lonely one, saved by the honesty of beasts and the patience of a woman the whole world overlooked, and I nearly overlooked myself. If there is a moral to set at the foot of so long a telling, it is only what my wolves knew before I did and tried for weeks to teach me. That strength is not the thing that cannot be touched, but the thing worth touching. That a king who will not love is only a king who has not yet been shown what he is missing. And that the truest hearts in any realm will always, if you let them, choose better for you than you would choose for yourself. If only you can be humble enough to follow the lean and ask their leave, and believe them when they lie down at your feet and refuse for love to rise. The fire is coals, the wolves are a ring, her hand is in mine and the mark is warm. I am the Alpha King of Stormhollow, and I have everything, and it fits in one small room, and it is asleep around me, and I would not trade it for the world I once thought I wanted. Good night, then, from the warm stones. The pack is keeping watch, as it always has, over the two hearts it chose. It will not lie to us, it never has. And in the morning, as in every morning of my kept and grateful life, I will wake to the sound of my wife walking the pens in the gray before the sun, naming each wolf as she goes, and every great head will rise to meet her. And I will lie still a moment and listen, and smile before I can stop it, and rise, and go to them, to all of them, to the whole ringed and honest heart of everything I have.